I still remember the way they laughed. Not just a chuckle or a smirk, but full-blown, gut-wrenching laughter that left my mother wiping tears from her eyes and my father shaking his head in amusement. My siblings. They were the worst of all. My younger brother, Nate, practically fell off the couch, clutching his stomach as if my words had physically hurt him. "You," he gasped between wheezes. "You want to start a business?" I forced a smile, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. "Yeah. I've been thinking about it for a while. I'm tired of working for someone else. I have a solid plan." My older sister, Amanda, smirked over the rim of her coffee cup. "Oh, this should be good. Do tell." I took a deep breath and tried to ignore the heat rising to my face. "It's a small business, but it has potential. I want to start my own woodworking shop. Custom furniture, handmade pieces." That was when my father snorted so loudly that my words died in my throat. "Son," he said, shaking his head, "you've always been good with your hands, but a business? That's a different beast. You have a steady job. Don't throw that away chasing some dream." "It's not just a dream," I insisted, my voice firmer now. "I've been saving up. I've already made a few pieces and sold them online. People like my work." Nate scoffed. "So you sold a couple of shelves and suddenly you're an entrepreneur?" My mother sighed, setting down her knitting. "Sweetheart, we just don't want you to get hurt. Businesses fail all the time." I clenched my jaw, looking at the faces around me. None of them believed in me. Not one. "Just think about it," Amanda added in a softer tone, as if that would somehow make the mockery sting less. I stood up, brushing the crumbs from my jeans. "I have thought about it," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm going to do it. With or without your support." The room fell silent. Then, as if on cue, they laughed again. But this time, I didn't stay to listen. The laughter still echoed in my mind as I drove home that night. I tried to push it away, but it clung to me like sawdust on a workbench. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being reckless. But then I thought about the hours I had spent in my garage, shaping rough slabs of wood into something beautiful. The way my hands knew every groove, every grain, how the smell of sawdust filled the air like the promise of something new. I had already sold a few custom tables online. People loved them. Strangers, complete strangers, saw value in my work. So why couldn't my own family? As soon as I got home, I grabbed my notebook and flipped to my plans. I had spent months sketching out my ideas, listing tools I needed, calculating costs. I wasn't just jumping into this blind. I needed a space, something bigger than my garage. I had been eyeing a small workshop on the edge of town. The rent wasn't cheap, but if I took the risk, it could be the start of something real. The next morning, I made the call. "Yes," I told the landlord. "I'll take it." There was no turning back now. Signing the lease was the easy part. What came next was a whirlwind of long nights, empty bank accounts, and moments of self-doubt that nearly swallowed me whole. The workshop was a dusty, abandoned mess when I first stepped inside. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, and the air smelled like neglect. But as I ran my fingers along the walls, I saw potential. I saw my future. I spent the first week cleaning and setting up. Every spare dollar went into getting the right tools, a table saw, a planer, a set of chisels finer than any I had ever owned. I couldn't afford the top-of-the-line equipment, but I made do. During the day, I still worked my 9-to-5 job, dragging myself to the workshop in the evenings. I lost count of how many nights I fell asleep on a pile of wood shavings, only to wake up stiff and sore, ready to do it all over again. Sales trickled in, slow at first, but steady. A custom bookshelf for a young couple. A hand-carved coffee table for an old man who said it reminded him of one his father had made. Each sale was proof that I was on the right path. And yet, my family never asked how it was going. Not once. It was as if they had already decided I would fail, and there was no point in checking in until it happened. But I had other people who believed in me. One evening, as I sanded down the edges of a mahogany dining table, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Saw your latest piece online. It's amazing. You should be so proud of yourself. Claire had been my best friend since college, one of the few people who never laughed when I talked about my dreams. She checked in often, always asking about my progress, always encouraging me when doubt crept in. I stared at her message for a moment before typing back. Thanks. I just wish my family could see it the way you do. Her reply came almost instantly. They will. One day, they'll see what you built. I wanted to believe that. I just didn't know how long it would take. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, my small woodworking business began to gain traction. Word spread. Customers shared photos of their custom pieces on social media, and before long, I was getting more orders than I could handle alone. My garage-turned-workshop now felt too small, but the cramped space didn't bother me. I was building something real. Then, one day, it happened. An email came through from a high-end interior designer in the city. She had seen my work on Instagram and wanted to feature some of my furniture in a boutique hotel she was designing. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Me? My work in a hotel? I read the email 3 times before I dared to reply. We set up a call, and within a week, I had my biggest order yet, a full set of handcrafted dining tables and chairs for the hotel's new restaurant. It was more than just a sale. It was a turning point. That night, I sat in my workshop, running my hands over the raw slabs of wood, imagining the final product. I should have felt nothing but pride. Instead, all I could think about was how I had no one to celebrate with. I hadn't told my family. Why would I? They had never cared before. Still, something inside me wanted to reach out, to show them that I wasn't just chasing a silly dream, I was succeeding. So I did something reckless. I sent a message to our family group chat. Just landed my biggest order yet. A full furniture set for a boutique hotel. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. A part of me hoped, maybe just this once, that they'd be proud. For a long time, there was silence. Then, one by one, the responses came in. Nate, wow. That's unexpected. Congrats, I guess. Amanda, wait, seriously. That's actually impressive. Good for you. Mom, that's nice, honey. Just be careful not to overwork yourself. Dad didn't say anything. It wasn't the reaction I had hoped for, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The hotel project consumed me for weeks. I worked harder than ever, crafting each table and chair with precision. Every night, I left the workshop exhausted but satisfied, knowing that my work would soon be displayed for hundreds of people to see. When the final pieces were delivered, the interior designer sent me a message. They're perfect. The client loves them. Expect more business soon. More business. More growth. My dream was no longer just a dream, it was a reality. But when I looked at my phone, there were no new messages from my family. Not a single one. They had acknowledged my big order, but after that? Silence. No follow-ups. No calls asking how it went. It was as if my success existed in a different world, one they refused to step into. I tried not to let it bother me. Instead, I poured myself into the business. Orders kept coming in, and I finally hired my first employee, a young guy named Leo, eager to learn the trade. Teaching him reminded me of why I had started this in the first place. One evening, as we were finishing up a custom coffee table, Leo wiped his hands on his apron and grinned. "Man, your family must be proud," he said. I hesitated, then forced a smile. Yeah. Something like that. I didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. Because deep down, I was starting to wonder if they'd ever see me as anything more than the fool who dared to chase a dream. Months passed, and my business kept growing. I expanded the workshop, took on more orders, and even launched a website. The dream that my family once mocked was now my full-time career. And yet, they still barely mentioned it. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Amanda. I frowned at the screen. My sister almost never called unless it was about a family gathering or a birthday reminder. Curious, I picked up. "Hey, Amanda. Everything okay?" There was a pause. Then, in an unusually hesitant voice, she said, "Yeah. I was just wondering. Do you still do custom pieces?" I nearly dropped my phone. Yeah. Why?" She sighed. "Well, Nate and I were talking, and Mom wants a new dining table. She loves those rustic-style ones, and I figured, maybe you could make it." For a second, I didn't know how to respond. After all this time, after all their laughter, their dismissal, they suddenly wanted my work. "Mom wants a table," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," Amanda said quickly. "And, well, we thought it'd be nice if it came from you. You know, since this is kind of your thing now." Kind of my thing. I should have been thrilled. But instead, I felt something else, something colder. Because now that they needed something, they finally saw value in what I did. I took a slow breath. "I'll think about it," I said. Amanda paused. "Oh. Okay. Just let me know, then." We hung up, and I sat there, staring at the screen. For the first time in years, my family wanted a piece of my work. The question was, did they deserve it? For days, I couldn't stop thinking about Amanda's call. They had laughed at me. Dismissed my dream. Never once checked in on my progress. And now, out of nowhere, they wanted me to make something for them. Part of me wanted to refuse. To tell them to go buy a mass-produced table from a furniture store like they probably would have if I didn't exist. To remind them of every time they had rolled their eyes when I talked about my business, of every joke Nate had made, of every time my dad had told me to be practical instead of chasing fantasies. But another part of me hesitated. Because despite everything, they were my family. And despite everything, I still wanted to show them what I could do. That evening, I couldn't focus on my other projects. The idea of building that table sat in the back of my mind, taking up space like an unfinished thought. I ran my hands over a raw slab of walnut in my workshop, imagining the way it would take shape, the way the grains would stand out under polish, the way it could become something beautiful. And then, as if on cue, Claire walked in. She had a habit of dropping by unannounced. This time, she had 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Figured you'd be in here working late," she said, handing me one. I took it with a nod of thanks. Claire had always been like this, supportive in the quiet, effortless way that made it feel like she had always believed in me, even when no one else did. She sat on the edge of my workbench, swinging her legs slightly. "All right," she said, watching me carefully. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated before answering. "My family wants me to build something for them." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And that's bad, why?" I sighed, setting down my coffee. "Because they never cared before. They laughed when I said I wanted to start my own business. They made me feel like I was being ridiculous. And now that they want something, suddenly they're taking me seriously." Claire nodded, taking a slow sip of her drink. "I get it. Feels like they only see your worth when it benefits them." "Exactly," I muttered. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked. I stared down at the piece of walnut I had been working on earlier, running my fingers over the rough grain. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to say no. just to make a point. To remind them that they only care now because they need something from me. Claire tilted her head. And the other part? I exhaled, staring at the unfinished wood. The other part of me wants to do it. Not for them, but for me. Because I know I can build something incredible. And maybe, in some small way, I still want them to see it. Claire smiled softly. Then do it. But do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because you need their approval. Do it because you want to, because it's your craft. If you let their past judgments control your decisions, you're still letting them have power over you. I let her words settle in. She was right. For so long, I had let my family's opinion shape the way I saw my own success. But the truth was, I didn't need their validation anymore. I had built something real, something worthwhile. Whether or not they fully acknowledged it didn't change that. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip, staring at the wood in front of me. All right, I said finally. I'll do it. Claire grinned. Good. Now, tell me your design idea, because knowing you, this won't just be any table. She was right. It wouldn't be just a table. It would be a statement. And this time, I wasn't building it for them. I was building it for me. Once I made the decision, I threw myself into the project. I didn't just want to make a dining table, I wanted to make the best one I had ever built. Not for their approval, not to prove anything, but because I wanted this piece to be a reflection of the journey I had taken. I selected a beautiful slab of solid walnut, rich with deep grains that swirled like the patterns of a story being told. Every knot, every imperfection added character, just like every struggle I had faced along the way. I spent weeks crafting it, working late into the night, pouring every bit of myself into the details. The edges were hand-sanded until they were smooth as glass, the legs carved to perfection, sturdy and timeless. I reinforced the joints with age-old techniques, ensuring the table would last for generations. This wasn't just furniture. This was a statement. A testament to the fact that I had built something from nothing. As I worked, I thought about all the times I had wanted their approval. All the times I had imagined hearing my father say he was proud of me, or my mother telling her friends about my success. And I realized something. I didn't need it anymore. By the time the table was finished, I stood back and admired it, not with the hope that my family would love it, but with the quiet satisfaction that I had created something incredible. I called Amanda. The table's done, I said. She sounded surprised. Oh. That's great. When can we pick it up? I'll deliver it, I said. There was a pause. Okay. That works too. On Sunday afternoon, I loaded the table onto my truck and drove to my parents' house. As I pulled up to the driveway, a strange feeling settled in my chest, nostalgia, maybe, or something close to it. This was the house where I had grown up. The place where my dreams had first been laughed at. I knocked on the door, and my father answered. He looked at me, then at the table in the truck bed. His brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing. Brought the table, I said. Amanda and Nate appeared behind him, stepping onto the porch. My mother came last, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. Her eyes softened when she saw the table. Oh, it's beautiful, she murmured. Yeah, Nate admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Didn't think you'd actually do it. I ignored the sting in his words and gestured toward the truck. Help me carry it in. We brought the table into the dining room, where my parents' old, worn-out table had already been pushed aside. As we set it down, my father ran his hand over the surface, feeling the smooth wood. This is solid work, he muttered, almost to himself. My mother traced the edge with her fingers. It's better than anything we could have bought, she said softly. For a while, no one spoke. Then Amanda cleared her throat. I guess. I never really thought about how much goes into this. Your work, I mean. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, standing in my childhood home, surrounded by the people who had once laughed at my dream, I realized something. They saw it now. They might not say it outright. They might never give me the grand acknowledgement I had once craved. But I could see it in their faces, in the way they ran their hands over the table, in the quiet respect that filled the room. And that was enough. As I turned to leave, my father spoke. "You did good, son." I paused, my hand on the doorframe. Then I nodded. Yeah. I did. And for the first time, I didn't need their approval to believe it. After that day, something shifted. My family didn't suddenly become my biggest supporters overnight. They didn't flood me with praise or beg to know every detail of my business. There were no grand apologies, no heartfelt speeches admitting they had been wrong. But the silence was gone. A week after I delivered the table, my mother called, just to ask how things were going. It was a simple conversation, filled mostly with small talk, but I could tell it was her way of reaching out. I could hear something different in her voice, something softer, more attentive. She wasn't just talking to fill the silence, she was listening. A month later, Amanda messaged me a photo of the table, set for dinner, with a simple text. "Still looks amazing. Mom loves it." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because it was the first time Amanda had acknowledged my work without a hint of sarcasm or skepticism. "Glad she's happy with it." That was all I wrote, but for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just the dreamer in the family. I was someone they could respect. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. When I looked at the screen, I saw my father's name. It was late, almost 10 p.m. My father never called just to chat. The last time he had called me directly was probably 2 Christmases ago, and even then, it was just to ask when I was showing up. A strange feeling settled in my chest as I answered. "Hey, Dad." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Then, in his usual gruff tone, he said, "You still taking orders?" I sat up in my chair. "Yeah, why?" "My buddy from work needs a bookshelf," he muttered. "Told him you might be able to make one." I was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. My father, who had laughed at my dream, who had told me I was being reckless, was now telling people about my business. He was recommending me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession that he had been wrong. But it was something. And sometimes, something is enough. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to stay casual. "Yeah, I can do that." "What's he looking for?" We talked for a few minutes about the details. His friend wanted a sturdy bookshelf, something big enough to hold a lifetime of books. As my father relayed the request, he hesitated before adding, almost as an afterthought, "Said he saw that table you made for your mom. Said it looked real nice." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wooden beams of my workshop ceiling. "Yeah." I said. "Yeah." Another pause. It was good work. For my father, that was the closest thing to a heartfelt compliment I would ever get. And yet, hearing those words, simple as they were, felt like closing a chapter of my life I didn't even realize was still open. We wrapped up the call, and after I hung up, I sat there for a long time, just thinking. Thinking about how much things had changed. How they had once laughed at my dream. How I had spent years fighting to prove myself, waiting for them to acknowledge what I had built. And now, here I was. They were asking for my work. Not because they felt obligated. Not because they pitied me. But because they saw its value. The difference was, I no longer needed their validation. I had already proven everything I needed to myself. I got up, stretching, and ran a hand over the workbench in front of me. It was covered in sawdust, wood shavings, and half-finished projects, but to me, it was a symbol of everything I had built from nothing. This was my dream. My business. My success. And now, whether they admitted it or not, they were part of it. I smiled to myself, grabbed my tools, and got back to work. The end.